like hearing about ghosts right before bed. Why do we have to do this now? This is not a good time. What happens with the potato famine? It's so creepy. Anyway, more chapters from A Ghost of a Chance. And if you don't like having to wait, you can buy the book. It's available on Amazon, and the link is below. But, you know, potato famine!
Chapter 17. Bridget looked out the front door, Tyler right beside her. Jasper appeared to be carrying a bundle, which Tyler hoped was food for this family. The children danced around him as he walked. That was something he would want to have in his life one day. A wife waiting for him at the door, children dancing around his feet. He couldn't think of a better way to end a day than coming home to what Jasper was coming home to. Tyler watched as Jasper came into the cottage and pecked his wife on the cheek and then handed her the bundle. She put it on the table and took his coat and his scarf and went to hang them up. Jasper called the kids over and told them to keep looking out at the path because Quinn, who had his carriage, was coming along soon with a bucket of milk and a crock of butter. Bridget came back into the kitchen and began to untie the string on the bundle. Jasper put his arms around her waist and lay his head on her shoulder, breathing in the scent of her hair. Tyler felt a pang of jealousy, a feeling he had no right to have. "You're getting to be a bit too skinny, woman," Jasper spoke. "You need to eat more. We can all do with a little less if it means keeping you plump. I eat enough and the children are happy, if a little underfed, and you, my strong man, you need to eat too." He turned Bridget to face him. "Can you promise me that you will eat more? There'd be no sense of us going to America if we all don't go." I will eat more," Bridget consoled her husband. "Do you promise?" he said, looking into her soft blue eyes. "Aye," she said, and turned back to the package. Inside was a block of salt pork, 6 eggs, a chunk of cheese, a small bag of ground wheat, and a brown package of fish. "Oh, Jasper, we can eat for days with this," she smiled gleefully at him. Tyler noticed, and he was sure that Jasper did too, that when she smiled, her cheekbones jutted out in sharp, angular lines, and her eyes appeared more sunken. The children came in and told their father that Quinn's carriage was coming down the lane. Everyone, including Tyler, went out on the front porch to watch. Quinn jumped down and went to the back of the carriage, brought a bucket of milk with the cream still on top over to Bridget, and handed a small crock of butter to Elizabeth. "Thomas, come over here. I have something for you to carry inside for your mama." Thomas ran over to the carriage and held his arms up, and Quinn grabbed 2 small parcels and jumped back down to the ground. He leaned over and asked Thomas if he was big enough to handle such a responsibility. "Aye, I am, sir," Thomas said proudly. "Here you go, then. You bring these to your mama." Quinn handed him the packages and asked him if he had them all right. "Aye, what's in them?" Thomas asked, the excitement making his cheeks rosy and his eyes bright. "It's a secret, but I will tell you if you promise not to ruin the surprise," Quinn said, stooping down to the little boy's level. Thomas crossed his heart and swore not to tell his mamma what the surprise was. "Aye, then. In the little one we have some Irish tea, not that pig slop English stuff we're forced to buy. And in the big one we have a big old piece of beef. It should make enough for you all to have a fantastic dinner. Mama is going to be so happy. She worries about food all the time now." Thomas confided in Quinn. We all do, little man. We just need to get through the winter, and with God's good grace and the luck of the Irish, we will see good crops next year, Quinn said, trying to instill the hope that they were all grasping onto in the little boy. Now you run off and get those to your ma, and don't tell her. I will, and I won't, Thomas said, confusing himself for a few seconds. Thomas ran into the house. Mama, Quinn gave me these too. He said you would be so happy and not tell you what was inside. Bridget laughed. Her baby, was laughing like it was Christmas morning. She took the packages from him and asked him which one she should open first. The one with the tea in it, Mama, Thomas yelped out and then slammed his hands over his mouth. Tears welled up in his eyes. I ruined the surprise. Oh, no, you didn't. I didn't hear what you said. Your hands were already in front of your mouth, so it came out sounding like you were talking with your mouth full of bread, Bridget said, knowing full well what he had said, but refusing to break her little boy's heart. Are you sure, Mama? Thomas said, wiping the tears and snot off his face with his sleeve. I am sure. Let's get these open, but first I want you to go clean up your face. You look like a snail slimed you. Ooh, Mama. Thomas scrunched up his little face and ran off to get a handkerchief. Moments later, Elizabeth, Jasper, and Thomas were surrounding the kitchen table, waiting for Bridget to open the packages. She took the smaller one and fumbled with the tie. She couldn't break it like she usually did. Jasper, seeing her struggle, took a knife out of his pocket and cut the string. She unfolded the brown paper carefully and gasped when she saw the tea packet inside. Oh my goodness, real Irish tea. We should save this for a special occasion. Every day is a special occasion, so no, we shouldn't save it, Jasper said, worried that they might not last long enough to enjoy the tea. Aye, Bridget nodded her head, understanding what he was saying. Open the other package, Mama, open it, Thomas sang. What do you think it is? Elizabeth asked. She was just as excited as her brother, but was trying not to show it. Jasper looked on curiously, as even he didn't know what was in the package. Thomas cupped his hands over his mouth to keep himself from blurting out the contents as Jasper cut the string that held the paper closed. Bridget made a big deal out of opening the package. Oh, so slowly. She hadn't seen her children this excited. Even today, when they got biscuit, they were thrilled then, but not the over-the-top excitement they were showing now. She wanted to make it last. Painstakingly slow, she finally got the package open to see what looked like a good 2 pounds of beef. Is this? She whispered to Jasper. It sure is, he said back to her. His arms went around her as her shoulders began to shake and the tears came down her face. Thomas ran to his mother and wrapped his arms around her skirt. It's all right, Mama, don't be sad. Oh, my sweet babe, these are happy tears, you can be sure of it. Bridget held her little boy tight. I almost don't want to cook it, but I guess without salt we have to, eh? She said to her husband. How do you want to cook it? Jasper asked. I will put it in a soup. That way it will last longer, she said, turning toward the table. You children go in the other room and make yourselves busy. Your papa and I will get everything set to rights. Bridget busied herself cutting the meat into small pieces and then coating them with a sprinkle of flour. She kept out a little bit of butter from the crock and a cup of the milk. Jasper put the dry goods and the meat into their cold cellar and poured the cream and milk into jugs. These he would cap off and hang from ropes into the ice-cold water of the well. Tyler watched all of this silently, feeling guilty for being a voyeur, but he couldn't turn himself away from the goings-on and found himself happy that they were able to have food, if only for the next couple of days. Bridget made a hearty stew with the meat and other ingredients she had. The children will go to bed with full bellies tonight, she said to Jasper. I am glad of it. The family sat down to eat their stew, Jasper and the kids slopping up the broth with their thick slices of bread. Bridget ate hers slowly, taking out the meat and putting it into her children's bowls. Jasper and the children ate like they had never seen food before. "Why do you not have any bread with butter, Mamma?" Elizabeth asked. "I ate mine while I was waiting for the stew to cook," Bridget lied. "Oh, do you want some?" Thomas asked, holding out his bread. Bridget took a small nibble and handed it back to him. "I could not eat another bite," Bridget told him. Jasper looked at her suspiciously. He knew how much bread was left, and that the thickness in which it was cut only allowed for 3 slices. Bridget set the kitchen to rights, while Jasper read the children's stories from the Bible. Before he could finish the last story for the night, she went into their bedchamber and changed into her nightgown, a white sheath with eyelet trim and a small pink ribbon at the neckline. It was big on her, which she was grateful for. The flowing ruffles belied the amount of weight that she lost since the famine started. She put on a pot of water and laid out 2 cups. She was going to make tea for her husband and herself after the children were in bed. Jasper sent the children off to put on their sleeping gowns and went into the kitchen, wrapping his arm around Bridget's waist. He nuzzled her neck and whispered, "You need to eat. The children need to eat to survive. You need to eat so that you can provide. I eat." "You do not eat enough," Bridget sighed. "The children need to eat. The children need their mother, and I need her as well." She turned around and gave her husband a peck on the lips and squirmed out of his arms. "The children need to say their prayers." "I'll make the tea while you get them to bed," Jasper offered. The children were already in their night clothes and in their cot when Bridget went in to tuck them in. It was late October, and the nights were very cold, the stone walls offering little insulation from the breezes that came off the ocean. She hugged the children and said their prayers with them. She tucked them in and kissed them both on their foreheads. "Just one story, please, Mamma, please," implored Thomas. "One about the fairies, please, Mamma." Bridget smiled and began to tell them a short story about Frederick, the king of the fairies. She had just gotten to the part where he tricked a mermaid into giving him his freedom and stopped. Both children were sound asleep, breathing evenly, and Thomas had his finger in his mouth. She got up slowly to avoid getting dizzy and went out to the kitchen, where a cup of tea and Jasper sat waiting for her. On a plate beside her cup was a piece of cheese and a few berries. "Eat that," Jasper ordered. Bridget picked up her tea and looked over at her husband. She noted that he had put more cream into her tea than he normally did. She picked up a berry and ate it. She didn't want him to know how little she was eating. After they had their tea and she had eaten her berries and cheese, they got up to go to bed. "Tomorrow, while you bring the children to church, I will go to the city and see if I can get more food into this house. I have a few more pieces of farm equipment that I can sell," Jasper explained. "I do not need to have a new frock for the trip to America. It's more important for us to have the food we need to get us to that day. 10 more days. We can get through this. We will get through this, but you need nourishment. I need you to eat. You must be strong to survive the journey." Chapter 18. Tyler was just about to tell Bridget that he agreed with Jasper when his stomach tightened and he sat up straight in bed. Waiting for the pain to pass, he realized that the room was spinning and he needed to find his way to the bathroom. Scrambling out of bed, he practically crawled to the toilet and vomited up everything in his stomach. Groaning, he crawled over to the shower to grab a towel off the rack. The dizziness started to subside, but was replaced with a skull-splitting headache. He lay his head on the closed toilet lid and let the coolness of it relieve some of the pain. Tyler almost begged the toilet to make it stop. He struggled to stand up and make his way to the kitchen to his bottle of pills, bumping into furniture and knocking things over on the way. He picked up the large bottle of pills and looked at them, wondering if they would relieve the pain enough for him to be able to function. The small bottle of pills had a stronger painkiller, but they knocked him out. The decision was made for him when a wave of dizziness had him sliding to the floor. Tyler gripped his head in his hands, and a sob escaped his lips. For the first time he wished he had stayed home, hiding out at his parents' house. Crawling to the fridge, Tyler fought the urge to throw up, knowing that if he did, the pain would be so much worse. Worse than it was even now. He knew two things to be true. Throwing up or crying made the pain horrifically worse than it was to begin with, which was already unbearable. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and winced when the door closed with a click. He opened it up and tried to take a sip, and as the water went down his throat, his stomach lurched. He grabbed the bottle of strong painkillers off the counter and ran into the bathroom to throw up, again leaning his head on the cold porcelain of the toilet. Lying there, unable to move and fighting the dry heaves, he wished he had just decided to get the surgery. Screw the last book, screw the fans, and even bigger screw you to his agent and publisher who were pressing him to get the book written. An almost inaudible "I don't care" came out of his mouth as he sank further onto the floor, burrowing into the bath mat that lay beside the tub. He wasn't aware of where he was or what was going on when a pair of gentle hands pulled him up off the floor. "Come on, son, let's get you into bed," Quinn Connors said as he picked Tyler up like he was nothing more than a babe. "Here, pull down those covers, Ma, so I can get this lad into the bed." Evie ran to the side of the bed and dutifully turned down the covers and fluffed up the pillow. She then went to the cabinet to look for extra blankets. Once Tyler was tucked in, Quinn tried to ask him if he had taken any of the painkillers from the bottle that was on the floor. "I don't think he did," Evie said. Holding Tyler's hand, she gently shook him and asked, "Did you take any of these pills here, Ty? Do you need them?" Tyler barely nodded his head. "Is that a yes, you need them, or yes, you took them?" Quinn asked. Evie shook her head at her husband. "He can't answer both of them, Quinn. Ask only one." "Aye," he said, as he sat on the bed. He put his hand on Tyler's arm and asked him, "This is important, son. Do you need to take some of those pills from the bottle that were on the floor?" "Yeah," rasped Tyler, and he tried to swallow the pain. Evie helped Tyler sit up and put 2 of the pills into his mouth and held up the bottle of water so that he could drink them down. Evie patted his hand and took notice when his breathing began to slow and even out. Evie had come over in her dressing gown, an overly pink and frothy bathrobe that she wore when she wanted to curl up and spend the night reading or crocheting. Her hair was already in rollers, those old-fashioned pink ones that you can always find on the bottom shelf at the drugstore. "Quinn, should we look at his phone and call his people?" Evie asked, looking at her husband, whose thin gray hair was sticking straight up from running his fingers through it, his face lined with worry as he met her eyes. "I don't know. Let's get him through this, but I'm going to call Dr. Bell and have him come over here and take a look at him." Quinn took his cell phone out of the front pocket of his worn-out overalls and began to click the buttons. That was the last thing Tyler heard before slipping into a painless sleep. Tyler watched Bridget wake up and find that Jasper had already left. She got the children up and dressed for church. She gave each child one of the last 2 pieces of fruit to eat on the way to the village. Tyler suspected that some time had passed since he saw them last, as the ground was covered in frost and Bridget looked emaciated. "Come along, children. We don't want to miss Father O'Malley's sermon," she said, taking each of their hands into hers and briskly walked them to the church. She paused to open the church door and found that it was too heavy for her to pull open. Elizabeth grabbed the handle and helped her mother. Thomas went inside and leaned his back against the door to help his sister hold it open while his mother slipped inside. Bridget sat in a pew, suddenly feeling like she was burning up from the inside out, and she became dizzy. She felt an arm go around her and a piece of bread being pressed into her hand. She looked up and saw Sarah O'Neill smiling at her. She tried to refuse the bread, but Sarah patted her hand. You need it more than I do, Sarah said. Eat it now. No one will fault you. You have children and a husband to tend to. You can't do either in the state you're in. Bridget smiled at Sarah and nodded her head in compliance. She tore off a piece of the bread and put it into her mouth. The second piece she tore off went into Thomas's mouth, and the third into Elizabeth's. The 4 bites that she actually got into her made her feel better, and quite full, actually. They listened to the sermon and the list of people who had died in the last week. Every Sunday the list got exponentially longer, and the number of people in the congregation became smaller and smaller. It was a bad time to live in Ireland. While the children ran around outside, the women talked. Before the famine, there were sweet treats and tea after communion, but since the famine, everyone left as soon as possible. If there was one good potato or an egg available, they wanted to be the first to get it. People were fighting over food, cousin against cousin, over a spoiled cabbage or a scrawny chicken. There was nothing to harvest and nothing to plant. Rows and rows of white wooden crosses stretched across the fields where vegetables used to grow. Many families were escaping the famine by taking ships over to England or America, while the majority were escaping starvation by dying. Elizabeth and Thomas were ready to go home and started to pull on their mother's arms. She didn't have the energy to fight them off, so she said her goodbyes and walked back to her cottage with the children. When they got home, Bridget headed up the leftover soup and divided it into 2 bowls for the children. She took the empty pot down from the hook and put it aside to cool before she would take it outside and wash it. She stumbled and almost dropped the hot pot, but was able to divert it onto the hearth before it slammed down on her foot. She boiled water for tea, and while it was steeping, she took care of the empty bowls the children had eaten out of. Thomas had begun to yawn, so she sent them both to have a lie-in. After a bit, she poured herself a cup of tea and slumped into a chair. Her head was pounding, and she was finding it difficult to stay awake. She pushed her cup aside and lay her head on the table. Within a minute, she was sound asleep. Late that night, her husband found her there, asleep at the table. The children were sitting on the floor, looking scared and hungry. "Papa, Mama has been asleep since we came home from church. We didn't even have supper." Jasper gently woke Bridget. When she stood, the world seemed to be spinning around her. She gripped onto him as hard as she could and vomited. Tears rolled down her face. She said, "I'm sorry," repeatedly. Jasper took her into the bedchamber and changed her into her nightgown, put her to bed, and then set about cleaning himself on the floor of their cottage. Bridget slept on and off. Her stomach felt sick, and she couldn't hold down anything that Jasper tried to feed her. She needed to get well. There was so much to prepare for their trip to America. Tyler just stood and watched this whole thing going on, feeling helpless. Bridget woke up to the smell of bacon cooking, and her mouth watered. She sat up and the room spun, so she leaned over the side of the bed and vomited. Groaning, she called out, her raspy voice so weak that no one heard her over the kitchen noise. She leaned back against the pillows and closed her eyes. Her skin was damp and covered in goosebumps. She was both cold and hot at the same time, and her head felt like her brain was trying to bash through her skull. "Jasper," she whispered when she saw him enter the bedchamber with a cup of water. "Here, drink this." He handed it to her and took a rag out of his pocket to clean up the mess she had left on the floor. Bridget drank the water slowly. "Did I smell bacon?" "No, I just fried some bread in bacon grease for the children for breakfast." "When did you come home?" she asked, trying to shake off the fog that surrounded her vision. "Last night. You were sleeping at the table, and Elizabeth said that you'd been there since they woke up from their mid-morning nap. Your skin felt damp, and you were so cold. After you emptied your stomach on me, I put you to bed," Jasper explained. Bridget groaned. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I'm just fighting to stay awake. My head hurts, and my stomach feels like it's burning." "Stay in bed today. I don't need to go to the peat bogs today because of the rain, so I can care for the children. Let me get you something to eat. Do you think you can hold down some salted fish and bread?" "Aye, thank you, Jasper." She lay back down, pillows bunched up beneath her, and waited for Jasper to come back. She heard a giggle and opened her eyes to see Thomas peeking around the dresser at her. "Hello," Bridget said, mock concern in her voice. "Is anyone there?" Thomas jumped out and squealed. "It's me, Mama, Thomas." "Come on up here." Bridget gestured for him to climb onto the bed. She laughed softly when he scrambled up and burrowed under the covers. She ran her fingers through his thick white blonde hair. He smelled of little boy, sweet dirt and grass. Shortly after, Elizabeth came in, looking for her brother. "Thomas, Papa said we must let Mama rest," she said with authority, and reached for him. Bridget lifted her hand to quiet her and pulled back the covers on the other side of her, inviting Elizabeth to come inside the warm bed too. Elizabeth didn't think twice about the invitation. She crawled in and snuggled up close to her mother. Bridget closed her eyes and listened to the innocent whispers of her children. Elizabeth talked of America, telling her brother of the abundance of potatoes and other root vegetables. Thomas said that when they got there and had a farm, Papa had said that he could have a horse. The prattling of the children stopped when Jasper entered the room. 2 sets of bright blue eyes stared up at him. "I thought I told you to let your mama rest." "They're fine, Jasper," she whispered, and snuggled their small bodies closer to her own. "Try to sit up. I've brought you some tea and bread," Jasper instructed as he put the cup of tea down on the table beside the bed. The children, knowing their father's look, slowly got out of the bed, kissed their mother, and went outside to play. Jasper sat on the side of the bed and tore off a piece of bread, put a small piece of fish on it, and brought it to Bridget's mouth. The smell of the fish hit her like a runaway heifer, causing her to gag and retch. Jasper jumped up, put the plate on the dresser, and held his wife while she emptied her already empty belly. Laying her back on the bed, he took the bedclothes off the top of the bed and brought them outside. They would need to be laundered. Hopefully, Elizabeth had helped her mother enough that she could instruct Jasper on how it was done. Jasper came back into the bedchamber with a clean coverlet and lay it over his sleeping wife's body. She was pale. Putting his cheek to her mouth, he could tell that her breathing was labored and weak. He needed to get a doctor or someone who could mend his wife. Jasper stood in the doorway to their little cottage and called out to their daughter, "Elizabeth!" Elizabeth came running with Thomas in tow. "Yes, Papa?" "I need you to run over to the O'Connor's house and see if the widow Grace can come over and help. I don't know what is wrong with your mama." "Yes, Papa," she said, taking off down the path, Thomas following on his short little legs. "Thomas, you stay here," Jasper barked out. "I never get to do anything," he whined. "Not now, Thomas. Come inside," Jasper ordered. Thomas pushed back the tears that were threatening to spill over his eyelashes and marched into the cottage. Tyler felt for the boy. He just wanted to pick him up and give him a cuddle, but, of course, they couldn't see or hear him. Jasper went into the bedroom and held Bridget's hand until Grace arrived. 20 minutes later, Elizabeth came bursting through the door with the widow Grace following behind. "Papa, Papa!" Jasper picked her up and kissed her cheek. "Good job, wee lass," he said, giving her a warm hug before putting her down. Elizabeth said that Bridget was sick and in bed. "Has she got the starving sickness?" Grace asked. "I don't know. She can't hold anything in her belly, and she's burning hot one minute and ice cold the next. Let me take a look-see and see what we have. Elizabeth, can you bring me a basin of water from the well, please?" "Yes, Miss Grace." I want to help Mama too," whispered Thomas, his lower lip trembling. "Oh, Thomas," Grace smiled down at the little boy, "you can get me some cloths to use with the water." Looking proud that he could help, Thomas ran off in search of some cloth. Grace followed Jasper into the bedchamber, and she immediately went over to check Bridget. Bridget groaned in her sleep as the fever raged through her body. Jasper took her hand in his and let Grace examine her. "She's been taken over by the sweats. A cool compress should help with that." "Has she been able to keep anything down?" "No, nothing, not even tea," Jasper answered. Please tell the children to hurry along and get what I asked for. I need to start wiping her brow immediately." Jasper went to check on the progress of the children. Elizabeth was just coming inside with a bucket of water from the well. Jasper handed her a basin and sent her to the bedchamber. Thomas stood beside the wooden chest that they kept their linens in, tears running down his face. Jasper knelt down beside him and asked him about his tears. "I don't know what those things are that Miss Grace told me to get, and Mama isn't getting better, and it's my fault," Thomas said between sobs. Jasper opened the chest and handed Thomas what was needed, using his sleeve to wipe the tears from the little boy's cheeks. "Here you go, lad. You bring these into the Widow Grace." Jasper and Tyler both smiled and watched the little boy run to the bedchamber with a handful of wiping cloths. Thomas handed her the cloths proudly, and she dunked one of them into the cold well water. She used it to wipe down Bridget's face and arms. Fighting the fever was the first step to setting the sick lass to rights. "You starved yourself to feed your wee ones, didn't ye?" Grace asked Bridget, knowing that the sick woman wouldn't answer. 2 basins of water later, and Bridget's skin finally began to cool down. Grace got up and went out to the kitchen to speak with Jasper. Jasper poured her a cup of tea and listened intently while Grace explained that his wife's fever broke and that they needed to make some broth to get into her as soon as she woke up. She quickly gave him directions on how to make the broth and went to check on her patient. Jasper went into the bedchamber, and Grace turned to him. Just looking at the expression on her face, he knew. His Bridget had passed. Tyler stood by, helplessly watching as Jasper knelt down beside the bed and took his dead wife's hands in his. He couldn't know the extent of Jasper's pain, but his own chest felt as if a burning blade had sliced right through his heart. Grace helped him clean her body and redress her into her nightgown, and then she went to call on Father O'Malley. The room changed slightly. Everyone was gone except for Bridget, who stood by the window looking out into the yard. Tyler whispered, "Bridget?" She turned toward him, smiled, and disappeared.
You know, it's really strange. Mr. Coffee has an obsession with the potato famine. I don't know why. But it's a little odd. So Mrs. Coffee is cross-stitching him a potato. What the hell? One other thing. Somehow it all kind of got away from her, and she found all kinds of emails and comments from like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago that she never replied to. So, apologies to everybody. Especially feeling bad. Tammy emailed her like 3 weeks ago. It was really a very sweet email, and she didn't reply. So Tammy, we did get the email. I don't know what happened. I think she's just got too many email addresses. You know, trying to segregate her life or some shit. I don't know. But anyway, never intentional to ignore somebody. Sorry about that. Oh, and Pam, she went to Hobby Lobby on her day off Monday. And we'll show what she got coming up as soon as she can. But yeah, Brian went with, and there's a story behind that. It was quite the adventure in the store. But yeah, that'll come up soon. We'll let you know what happened when she went to Hobby Lobby. Oh. Don't set those two loose in a craft store. Mm-mm.
I can tell you a few things she got. Nah, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not telling you what they bought. You gotta stay tuned. subscribe, hit the bell. It's gonna be monumental though. Yeah.